Global goals for noble souls, transforming our world to a better wonder to behold. No poverty, zero hunger, for the elderly or younger. Good health and well-being, good education, empowering women to become sensation. Clean water and sanitation, is it not the right of every nation? Economic growth, inclusive and sustained, through industry, innovation and infrastructure be gained. Reduce inequality for sure. Make cities and human settlements safe and secure. Take urgent actions to combat climate change. Conserve like below water, land, ensure we do not estrange. Justice for all, oh peaceful and empathetic nations. Let us all partner to achieve these goals and provide much needed salvation.
Good morning, good evening, namaste, hola, bonjour, mate, terve, and marapan. This is Namya Joshi, your host for the day. Welcome to episode 123 of the podcast Each One Teach 10, an amazing world of STEM. An inspiring venture where we'll be discussing that STEM is a part of every day for every kid. We all will learn together how to build a STEM culture. For today's episode, I'm really thrilled to welcome Ridwan Whitehead, who is interested in how people interact with intelligent systems and how those systems can be designed, evaluated, and improved to be genuinely supporting human goals. His work combines artificial intelligence, language, and human learning, focusing on a large language models alongside multimodal analytics and evaluation of methods that make AI more transparent and, of course, useful. He's trained in education and technology and currently works as a doctoral researcher at the University of Oulu. His current research explores how large language models and computer vision in the context of socially shared regulation of learning within collaborative learning groups. It's really excited to have you here today, Ritwan. So, how have you been doing today? And so on and so forth.
Well, thank you for the wonderful introduction, and yeah, glad to be here. I've been doing quite well. It's been quite nice weather.
Mhm.
We're going towards spring, so it's nice. It's been the spring holiday, the ski holiday, so that's also been nice. But yeah, I'm doing quite well. Thank you for asking.
Thank you. And it's great to know that we're transitioning into spring. However, like it's kind of on and off weather, and also there's less of greenery, but hoping to see that soon, where you
Yeah,
can have maybe berry picking happening soon. But
yeah.
yes, thank you so much for being a guest today on the podcast. So, for the first question, like we know that you work at the intersection of education, technology, and of course, human learning. So I'm curious to know what originally drew you into this space and how did your journey lead you to exploring how people interact with these intelligent systems?
Uh, well, I've always been involved in education one way or another. My bachelor's was in English language teaching. I well, look like understanding how people learn has always kind of been the main objective throughout my academic studies. And I also really like computers. I like playing with computers. I like just technology in general. But my bachelor's was not kind of it wasn't enough to give me a good understanding on like how, technology and learning comes together. So that's actually when I started my master's here in Finland on learning, education, and technology, where the aim was to learn more about that, and that was quite nice. But then after that, also, I realized that, well, actually, a master's is good. It gives you a lot of information about the field, but it's also quite introductory as well. It's like it helps, or uh, one way to put it is it kind of enables you to like dip your toes in a lot of different specialties in a certain like context in a certain field. Well, in my case, learning, education, and technology. But it was not, I didn't feel like it was really enough to kind of really call yourself like an expert or like a specialist in that. So that's when I decided to pursue a PhD degree. So I became a doctoral researcher, and yeah, I feel like I've learned a lot, but also it's one of those things that the more you learn, the more you realize that you don't know a lot. So it continues to be quite exciting, I must say. But yeah, this is the kind of journey that's brought me here to where I am today.
That sounds really inspirational, to be honest. Like starting from, teaching English, moving towards understanding learning itself through technology. And I really like how your curiosity about learning how people learn combined your interests in computers that gradually evolved into something more specialized. And it's interesting that you recognized your bachelor's and even your master's in the learning LET program at Oulu as just as the starting points, but most also like stepping stones that led you
Mhm.
to dive deeper through a PhD. And of
Yeah.
course, that sense of continuous learning really captures what this field is all about. So,
Mhm.
thank you for mentioning that.
You're welcome.
Right. So, your current research looks at the large language models and computer vision within collaborative learning groups. What is the core question that drives your research? And what have you basically discovered so far about how these groups regulate their learning together?
Um, well, so my original like research plan, or like the kind of research question that I'm trying to tackle, is to understand how uh like how groups learning together, so how people learning together face challenges and kind of overcome these challenges. However, the approach I'm taking is this nonverbal approach, so as more commonly known as like body language. So trying to understand how this body language or these nonverbal behaviors can help us understand how these groups, go through these different challenges, and how whether they overcome them or not, and how these nonverbal features, or like these different nonverbal behaviors, can help us understand uh, how they are doing and how we can support them. So that's the kind of core idea I'm trying to tackle, or I've been tackling throughout the years. And so where computer vision and like large language model comes into play, it's actually a part of my methodology. So how I approach kind of understanding the nonverbal behaviors of people working together in groups. So the one issue that I very soon realized when I started working on this was that it's very difficult to systematically understand the nonverbal elements of human behavior, especially in a context such as human learning, or human learning within groups, or a so-called collaborative learning, because it's very chaotic. If there are any like teachers who are watching, they would know that like human learning on their own is a mystery enough, but human beings learning together, that brings a lot of conflict, it brings a lot of movement, it brings a lot of communication, interaction, and that makes it very difficult to understand. And it's always a kind of like treated as a kind of mystery. Like we know that it's useful, but we also know that it can be very difficult to make it useful. Uh, so um, one of the reasons for this is that because nonverbal behaviors, they're very contextual. So when you speak a language, when you use like certain sentences, it's easier to kind of categorize them into certain categories that would help you understand how they are progressing with their group work. So, for example, you can say that a student saying, "Oh, I don't like where this is going." We could categorize that as, "Oh, this is a negative socio-emotional interaction expressed by this member." But then, as human beings, we do not only express ourselves with words, we also use our body language. And as a matter of fact, we use our body language more than we use our words. So what in this context, it's interesting because there's so much information that's available, but it's so hard to extract this information because the same thing of like I don't like what's going on. Non-verbally, you would be maybe you'd have a frown or you would distance yourself a bit more, and these are much harder to capture. But also, um, what I mean by contextual is that not every frown means that something is like negative. It could be like a sarcastic frown or like kind of expanding your distance from like your peer. That does not mean that you're unhappy with things, but it could mean that you're just going to pick up something from the other side of the table or the other side of the room. So it's very hard to kind of systematically understand or like put labels to why or like to certain behaviors and their implications or the meaning they have for how the groups work together. So I've used computer vision. Computer vision is a area of, I guess, engineering. I'm not sure. It's not really my specialty, but of engineering that uh, it's basically the field trying to have machines see the world. So it's related to how machines see the world. So if you've ever seen about like gesture control or like human detection in like videos. So all of those are under the umbrella of computer vision. Of course, you can see where this really goes to. So we can use these different technologies to kind of extract human behaviors from videos. So we can use yeah, like cameras and different algorithms to help us automate understanding human behavior in this certain context. So that's where this is where like this methodology really comes into play. And it's the same with like large language models, which is just the fancy term for ChatGPT and the likes. We all know that we can like take a picture of something and say, "Oh, like what do you see here?" It's like, "Oh," and then ChatGPT responds, "Oh, I see, I don't know, I see a room with a couch in it and this and that." And well, actually, when I first tried that, I thought, "Well, how can I actually use this to, take a picture of a classroom?" Well, not literally, but like in the sense of it, like how do you take a picture of a classroom and just with that picture say, okay, this student is maybe like encountering some challenges, or this group is facing some issues. So that was like the core idea of using large language models, and it turned out to be not so simple. Of course, if you're interested, you can always read my papers on that, and there are multiple other papers about that as well. But it's a promising avenue. But Yeah, I feel like I've spoken so much.
Oh, I absolutely agree. That's a fascinating perspective, especially how you're connecting like non-verbal behavior with collaborative learning. It's true that so much of how people work together goes beyond words. And of course, the body language very much reveals what learners are experiencing before
Mhm.
they even get to articulate it. And I really like how you describe the LLMs as a kind of methodological tool to study
Mhm.
these processes, even though like human learning, especially in groups, remains like very complex. And
Mhm.
sometimes, like you said, it's mysterious. And of
Mhm.
course, your point about like the challenge of interpreting the contextual, nonverbal cues or even using computer vision, it perfectly highlights why this area is both difficult and so valuable to keep on exploring and learning from. And of course,
Yeah.
I think even with ChatGPT or any other AI tool, getting to know about, how exactly, basically, what does the learner feel like, and
Mhm.
adding the image there, it can't be judged so well. So you're exploring more from these models, and as soon as they get better at learning behavior, we'll come to know about more things.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I feel like I need to do like add a little note there is that with like language models or like large language models, there's always a lot of caution that needs to be taken when it comes to like actually using them for such things because they're we don't they're what you would call like a black box model, so you do not really know why the intelligence decided that A is A or B is B. So like you do not really know why it like understands a picture in a certain way. And that can cause some issues such as like biases towards like well just like bias and just like of course hallucinations as well that also exists but yeah it needs to be approached with a lot of caution I must add.
That's true. Thank you for adding that. I totally agree. Right. So, while studying how groups are, learning and regulating, so have you ever noticed like how any human behaviors or patterns that actually surprised you, or things that we often miss out about how we think, communicate, or even learn together?
Hmm. Um, well, there's a lot to talk about non-verbally in groups, but like trying to think more concretely, I would try to think about like my latest research paper, and one thing that was quite interesting to me was that groups behave differently when they are more what's the word for that? When they are like seated more distant from each other than when they are seated m more closer to each other. So this is called the proxemics of communication. So how do we use our physical proximity to kind of communicate intentions or mood or feelings or just engagement as well? So we found that, for example, um, when students are working in a group are more distant, they do not really they encounter less challenges than when they are seated more closely. And one explanation for this is that because, well, students, when they are working on a task together, they kind of are forced to get closer to each other. And this means that they need that it's only when they are closer to each other that they have more like of these socio-emotional challenges. So like challenges related to the emotional working of the group or also metacognitive challenges such as like not really understanding what the task is or like not aligning on the task, etc. However, what we found is that one exception of a challenge was that when the groups were more distant, they had more challenges related to behavioral challenges. So really not caring about the task or like not engaging with the task. So this kind of confirms that, well, groups need to be closer together to actually like um progress with the task, and that even challenges discriminate between how people position themselves in a group. So that was like one interesting finding, I think. And maybe one more I mean, there are a lot of findings, but maybe one more finding that I'd love to highlight is that we use different we found out that we use different aspects of our like nonverbal behavior. So there are like many. So for example, like our gazes, so how where we look, the proxemics, so how far we are from each other, the posture, open, closed posture, and many others as well. These are all part of this nonverbal communication system. So one other aspect we looked at was gazes as well in the same study. And we found that there's this kind of really interesting dynamic between gazes and proxemics, where the students, even when they're further apart, they're still connected. But how they are connected is not through distance, but through the gazes. So we found that students would kind of realign by looking at each other when they were more distant from each other. But when they were closer to each other, they would not really look at each other because, well, there's no need to kind of close the gap with their gazes, if that makes sense. So these were like the interesting findings from my latest research. And yeah, I mean, I could
Yeah.
talk in the morning about like all the different aspects of it, but
That, no, honestly, that's really interesting. It almost flips off our assumptions about collaboration, like the idea that physical distance might reduce some social, emotional, and task-related challenges, while
mm,
closeness can actually introduce them. Really
mm,
makes you think about how, those subtle dynamics like space and body language
mm,
shape the group learning. I also find your point about gaze and posture fascinating, that students can, be meaningfully connected through
mm,
where they look or how they orient themselves,
mhm.
even though even though there's like not much of physical proximity involved that time.
Yeah,
And it really highlights how much, this unseen coordination goes into the effective teamwork. And that's again like the way of I think maybe viewing it or perviewing it depends on like situation, I guess.
yeah,
But yeah, that's a really interesting finding.
yeah. Thank you. At least somebody's saying that it's interesting.
Yo, I mean,
Yeah,
I find it interesting. It's kind of, I heard it for the first time. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense, honestly. Because you experience that when you work in group work. If you're sitting together, you don't have to look at each other. You're just working. But maybe like if you're sitting far apart, you can understand like, yep, okay, yep. And then you
mhm.
get into action. But yeah, I
Yeah,
think it just depends upon the situation as well. So
yeah,
yeah, it can be viewed in both ways.
yeah. Well, thank
And
you.
that, yeah, so that takes me to this question as someone who studies human interaction with intelligent systems. How do you think technology is shaping the way we see ourselves, our abilities, or our limitations, and even our identity as learners?
Well, I think that's quite interesting. Like I feel like the nature of learning is still at its core, it's still quite the same. Of course, there are different perspectives on how we learn or like to kind of frame how we learn. So, but I think no matter like the context, I think the context like might change a couple things in the process itself, but I feel like the core idea of how people learn is the same. So like one example that we like to give is that, well, it used to be that I don't know, like one short example from like the invention of internets, like the teachers used to be viewed as the giver of knowledge, right? So they would hold the knowledge and they would be giving this knowledge to the student. But then as the internet became more widespread, well, actually we realized that the giver of knowledge is Google. It's not the teacher, but perhaps the teacher is more in a facilitating role, kind of helping the students to, manage their own learning process, right? So the whole idea of like supporting the students' self-regulated learning skills and whatnot. So in the age of these more intelligent systems, it's like, okay, well, if these intelligent systems can facilitate as well, then the the role of like learning is it's becoming more of this like it's becoming more abstract. I think we view ourselves or we have to view ourselves more in a like a in a more bigger picture frame. I know my words are a bit scrambled right now, but we need it brings to attention the need to develop different skills. I would say so for example with ChatGPT we've seen a lot of issues related to over reliance towards these intelligent systems, and that is kind of revealing of the learner themselves to what kind of uh skills, not that they lack, but like the skills that they need to like work on. So usually the teacher would be uh kind of facilitating all of this, or at least attempting to facilitate all of this. But uh I feel like having like these artificial systems are it's like a brutal reminder for like learners that okay, you know, if you are like not if you're like using ChatGPT as a like a shortcut, then that's like a brutal reminder to the learner themselves that well, this is not working, and because well, human learning requires effort, it requires this like critical thinking and so I feel like yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but like different technologies, you know, they kind of shed light on different aspects of like the core human learning process where we need to kind of develop these skills that are essential to who we are as like biological beings, I guess you could say.
Yeah, honestly, that's a really powerful reflection of how basically learning has evolved in its nature. And I really like how you point out that even though the tools and concepts, contexts keep on changing from maybe the traditional classrooms to the age of where we're using intelligent systems, the essence always remains the same. You're right, of course, your idea that AI serves as a kind of a mirror or even a tough reminder for the learners is so true because it is exposing to them like where your genuine understanding and efforts are still needed. You can't absolutely rely on to get your tasks done on AI, and you wouldn't know what exactly it's doing. So it's always great to know about what exactly, if you have to use AI, use it where the base task is done, but then you use your own creative side. Because honestly, I think it's in a way that it's giving you chance to use your creativity. But if you're going to kill that too with artificial intelligence, then it's going to be really harsh in the coming future because with a lot of new models coming up, besides ChatGPT, we all know what skills need to be enhanced, and thank you for highlighting that. And it's really a great way to think about how teachers and AI can both play complementary roles for us,
Yes.
guiding, challenging, and of course supporting the learners so that they will think more critically instead of just, seeking those shortcuts and getting homework done and at the end of the day they know nothing. So it's time that we learn how to balance how to use AI, where to use your own creativity.
Yeah, and one thing that that came to my mind is that education in itself is a kind of response to needs of society. So, for example, like the Industrial Revolution meant that we needed people who would be like good workers in a factory who are able to like follow instructions and do a certain task over and over again. So during those days, education was designed to kind of support like these kind of hard skills where you know people would gain like expertise in these like different industrial processes. But then in the 21st century, like as in all the reports from like the United Nations and whatnot, or like the World Forum as well, is that well, today's world has very different needs. And I think a lot of that has to do with well the different technological developments. So like the Industrial Revolution in itself was a technological development, and that reflected into the human beings as requiring different needs. And in today's world, where I guess you could say it's like the age of information, uh, um, it also requires different needs. So I guess that was like the kind of point I was trying to make.
Absolutely, that's a really crucial one. Right. So, if I were to ask you a fun question, what is your favorite thing about Finland
Hmm. My favorite thing about Finland. Um, well, about living here or just like in
in
in gen
general?
in general. Well, it might be a bit cliche, but the whole or maybe not too much, but the what one thing that I really appreciate about Finland is the general notion of contentness. So like we all know about like, oh, it's the Finland is the world's happiest country, but actually the definition of happy is not all like laughs and giggles, but it's rather this like being content with life and being content with what you have and making the most out of, the current situation. And I think that's one thing that kind of like mentality is one thing I really appreciate here in Finland, where it's relaxed, but also it's doing its best considering the situation. So and like the general notion is being content. So that's my I guess favorite thing about Finland.
That's so true. I would agree with that as well because happiest country doesn't always have to mean like I had a podcast with Pekka Auli. It was in the YAMK recording studio, and
Mhm.
he was also like saying the same thing that it's not like you win a lottery or something. It's about that you are safe, you feel happy with what you have, and you're
Mhm.
content with that. And of course, like I also think somewhat it's also kind of like a very peaceful place and you
Yeah,
find yourself having retreat in nature. You
yeah.
kind of have a lot of time to self-reflect because I always make sure I take out some time during the day evening time to take a
Mhm.
walk around the lake, and I think that just gives me some time to self-reflect about the tasks I did, what else I could do. So I think it's a great place to get connected to nature. And of course, the northern lights are the icing on the cake.
Definitely. Northern Lights is quite nice.
Absolutely. Right. Thank you so much for sharing that. And to wrap up this discussion, if you imagine the future 10 years from now, what kind of world do you hope your work contributes to? Not just in terms of AI, but in terms of how people learn, connect, and understand each other.
Um, well, one kind of main contribution I would love to have towards the work like future research or like the future itself is that we have like a more holistic understanding of like what's going on. Well, because my work is in nonverbal behavior, and sometimes I get a bit sad not seeing too much research going on about it in the context of collaborative learning, because I'm a true believer of collaboration. Um, but also I'm a believer that like our interactions are not only verbally. So in the future, I hope that like the effort that I've put in is kind of built upon towards a more holistic understanding of how we learn together. Um, and I feel like this is also important because when you think about also perhaps like intelligent systems, um, usually like intelligent systems are only as good as the data you give to them. So if an intelligent system can only see what people say, that is not enough, I feel like, to kind of understand what's going on. So I often like to make a comparison, or like I often when I'm thinking about like any kind of learning analytics system or any kind of automatic support by a machine, I always like to think up from the perspective of a teacher. Like, what would a teacher notice that's going on, like to make a decision about how to support the process? And well, that's never just verbal things that they say, right? A teacher always notices all the different little subtleties and how a student is smiling or is sad or how the group is moving and I feel like my research hopefully will build towards a better understanding of that kind of complex dynamic so that these intelligent systems would understand us humans better so they can work with us better, they can support us better, and they can just make life better in general. So that's the kind of um, contribution I hope to have in the future.
Yep, that sounds really powerful and really promising. So, right, thank you so much for sharing your fantastic journey and insights today. I really appreciate how you've connected human learning technology and AI with such depth and clarity. And your work, of course, offers a refreshing reminder of like how meaningful learning truly is when we have curiosity, collaboration, and continuous growth together.
Mhm.
It's been a great conversation, and thank you so much for being a guest on today's podcast.
Well, glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining and listening to this episode. I'll see you in the next one. Till then, each one teach 10, lead us.